The 28mm Summilux-M is one of the best M lenses in the Leica lineup, but the Q series camera already has a 28mm Summilux attached to it. So if you have neither one, is it better to purchase a Q series camera or the 28mm Summilux-M plus an M body? Or if you already have a Q camera and an M body, is it worth it to add an additional 28mm lens on your M camera? I'll do a quick comparison between these two lenses, including some photo examples, and I'll talk about my final decision making. The 28mm Summilux-M f1.4 ASPH is a very high performing lens with extremely sharp images in the center and including the corners. It's made up of 10 lenses in 7 groups, and this gives it extremely high contrast and extremely low distortion. It is known for some purple fringing in high contrast situations, and this can be removed in Lightroom. And it's also known for some vignetting when it's wide open, but this is not too unusual for a high-speed wide-angle lens such as this. Close focus distance is 0.7 meters, and it also includes a floating lens element to maintain high performance in the close-up range. The lens body itself is fairly large and heavy, coming in at 439 grams for the lens only. The lens hood is square-shaped and made of metal, but the lens cap is made of this rubbery, plasticky material. So the hood and the lens cap don't match the ones on the modern 35 and 50mm Summilux. The lens on the Leica Q series is also labeled a Summilux because it's faster than f2.0, but the maximum aperture on this one is 1.7 instead of 1.4. This is an autofocus lens and it's fixed to the camera body, but this also allows the software of the camera to be more optimized to this particular lens. It's made up of 11 lenses in 9 segments and includes 3 aspherical lenses. And this is also a very high contrast and very sharp lens. In addition, the lens also includes a built-in macro mode, and the lens can also be used with an L Pro 52 to give even closer up macro shots. We'll take a look at some sample photos directly comparing the 28mm M lens compared to the Leica Q3. It's not a technical test, it's more of a casual comparison using some everyday photos, and I'm not sure the details will come out on YouTube, so I'll walk through the differences that I saw in Lightroom. And there's 5 major differences I'll talk through, including the differences in vignetting, color rendering, the field of view or focal length, image sharpness, and bokeh effect. I'm shooting both cameras standing in the same spot in aperture priority mode. So I'm setting the aperture and letting the camera choose the ISO and shutter speed. And this actually resulted in each camera choosing slightly different settings, and there were some differences in exposure, which I did not edit out. And I'm trying to align the left side of the barn towards the edge of the frame. The first set of 2 shots are shot wide open, so that's f1.4 on the M lens and f1.7 on the Q3. The big thing that stands out at first glance is the heavy vignetting on the 28mm M lens, but that could have been removed in Lightroom. As far as the colors, it's a slightly dull coloring, not as vibrant as the Q3. But the sharpness here is excellent. Even when I zoomed in the center and in the corners, everything looked very sharp on this lens. And here's the Q3 shot wide open, standing in the same spot. And the big difference I see here immediately is the wider field of view. So now you can see the entire small house on the right side, whereas before it was partially obscured. So this here confirms to me again that the Q3 gives a wider field of view than a normal 28mm lens. And I did some other testing on a previous video comparing the Q3 to the SL zoom lens. And the Q3 field of view came out more closely to a 25mm. There's much less vignetting with the Q3, and there is a difference in exposure also. The Q3 camera chose slightly different exposure settings, so this image is underexposed compared to the M11. But when I corrected for the exposure and brought up the exposure, I saw a difference in coloring also. The grass looked greener on the Q3, so the Q3 has some more vibrancy in the colors. And as far as the image sharpness, when I zoomed in Lightroom, I have to admit there was not that much difference that I could tell between this lens and the 28mm M lens. To my eyes, there might be a very slight advantage to the M lens in terms of sharpness, but it's a very, very small difference to me. So the Q3 28mm lens is also very sharp and very high performing. And here's the same spot shot on the 28mm M lens, stopped down to f8. So now the vignetting is gone. It still has a good exposure, and again, it's very sharp in the center and in the corners. I didn't really notice any significant improvement in sharpness stopping down to f8, but it's hard to get any sharper than that first image. And here's the Q3 stopped down to f8 in aperture priority mode, and again, the camera underexposed this image. And again, it's very sharp, not much difference than the other Q3 image. So without using technical charts, just in this everyday photo, I really don't notice a huge or significant difference in sharpness between the 28mm M lens and the Q3. To me, they look very similar, except again, the difference in the field of view and the color rendering. And here's another location shot wide open, and similar results with the M11 and the Q3. Nice and sharp, and I actually think I like the vignetting on the M lens. It gives it a more dreamy look. And the Q3 shot wide open, again you have the darker exposure, and here you can also see that the shed looks farther away than on the M lens. Now I'm trying to test out the bokeh in these last set of images. Again, trying to stay in the same spot, and I'm focusing in on the D on the sign. So the sign in front is sharp and in well focus, but looking at the shed in the back and the tree line, you can see some nice blurriness. And here's the Q3 at its maximum aperture, and again you can see a wider field of view. Even the sign looks farther away on this shot. The sign is still sharp and in focus, and you still have the blurriness of the shed in the background, but it's not as pronounced as on the M lens. So I do notice a better bokeh effect on the 28mm M lens. It's not a huge difference, but I do think the bokeh looks better on the M lens. So my takeaways from this very informal and very subjective comparison between these images, similar to what I would usually take on a normal day. There is a noticeable difference in a focal length between these two lenses. Also a difference in coloring, with the Q3 having brighter greens. There's also a significant difference in vignetting when the M lens is shot wide open. Again, that can be corrected in Lightroom. Also a difference with the nicer looking bokeh with the M lens, but not much of a difference between sharpness between these two lenses. Maybe a slight advantage with the M lens, but it was not as much as I might have expected. So with the M lens, you're getting a true 28mm focal length, slightly flatter color rendering, a better bokeh effect, and maybe slightly sharper images. Whether that's enough to justify its price, that's another question. Besides the differences in image quality, the bokeh, and field of view, there's also a few more pros and cons to each lens. For the price of the Leica Q3, you also get weather sealing, an automatic focus lens, and you get a camera body that can be put in fully automatic mode with automatic aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You get a tilt screen and weather sealing, and the camera plus lens is also lighter in weight and easier to carry. It has a bright, high resolution electronic viewfinder, so what you see through the viewfinder is actually what you're going to shoot. So the main benefit of the Q3 is you still get a high quality lens with a lower upfront cost and a lot of additional functionality coming from the Q3 camera body. The lens will always remain high quality, but the downside is that the camera body will eventually become dated and eventually become obsolete. So over time, the camera system will eventually lose value sooner than the lens itself. With the 28mm Summilux-M, you get a high quality lens with an even faster f1.4 aperture and a true 28mm focal length. But the greatest benefit of this lens is that it's interchangeable between M bodies. So when the M11 becomes obsolete, you can continue to use this lens on the future M16 or M17. And if you already own multiple M camera bodies, such as a monochrome or a film camera body, you can use this same lens between all of them. The other benefit of this lens is that it only works with a rangefinder camera. So you can set your camera to all manual and manual focus, and this slows you down and you become more deliberate with your photo taking. Or you can set the camera to aperture priority mode and let the camera choose the shutter speed and ISO, but this is still a different experience than the Q3. Focusing with the rangefinder patch and manually focusing the lens is a totally different experience depending on how you like to shoot. As opposed to the Q3, you can still set that to manual mode, but all the automatic features are still there. So it's always tempting just to let the camera do everything automatically and autofocus. And that's a totally different experience from the rangefinder experience. Whereas the Q3 experience can sometimes feel like you're just using an iPhone. So if you have neither of these lenses or neither of these camera bodies, which one would be a good choice as a first Leica lens? And the answer depends on your preference for shooting style. If you value autofocus and you value the extra features such as the video feature or the macro function, then the Q3 is a better choice. The Q3 is also a better choice if you need the weather sealing and if you don't plan on shooting at multiple focal lengths. It's an excellent 28mm focal length camera, but it's also a very decent 35mm when you crop in. If you do want to expand into further focal lengths and you still want autofocus and weather sealing, then the SL3 is a good choice for that. The Summilux-M lens is a better choice if you prefer the rangefinder experience with manual focusing, aperture priority mode, or just setting your exposure controls manually. And it's also a better choice if you want the versatility of shooting this lens between multiple M camera bodies. And if you're planning on keeping this lens for the long term, it will continue to perform at a high level and still retain its value. For me, my personal choice was to have both lenses. I purchased the Q3 first, and I still don't want to give it up to have the option of shooting video and macro video, and the option of autofocus for shooting fast-moving subjects. I also like the weather sealing, so I have no worries about taking this out in the rain or the snow. But right now, I prefer the rangefinder experience over the Leica Q3. And since I added the Leica MP in addition to my M11, I thought it made sense to add the 28mm Summilux-M so I can use that lens in between both of those bodies. But either lens is a great choice. They both produce very high quality images, and either lens will get the job done in almost any 28mm situation. Let me know in the comments which one you think is the better lens or better choice.